G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draw with Jazza. I'm Jazza, and in this video we're going to be talking about Flash VCAMs. What is a VCAM? VCAM stands for Virtual Camera. And so a VCAM is a symbol in Flash which has been coded to act as the camera in Flash. Now, why would people want to use this? Well, the default stage in Flash is rigid and in place and can't move. And so most people, when they begin using Flash, use that as the camera because it's set to a certain boundary which you can change the size of, and it's the best way to learn. That's how I learned. But eventually, when you get to creating more complex animations and scenes, it can be difficult to actually have things play in a way that is fluid while still sticking to that rigid background camera, where you do things to work around it, like tweening an entire scene across to have a pan, or doing things like parallaxing can become extremely complicated. And so VCAMs is where this process becomes much more natural and intuitive. And so I'm going to be talking about VCAMs today, showing you an example of how I've used them. But before we get to that, I'm going to give you some VCAMs. So I have two VCAMs for you to download. Click in the link in the description where it says to download the reference files, and you will get 3 Flash files. They're all in CS3, so they will work in Flash CS3 and above. And so, 2 of those files are VCAMs. One is a VCAM using ActionScript 2, and one is a VCAM using ActionScript 3. And so, the file essentially looks like this, where you have on the bottom layer just a bit of information on how to, basically change the aspect ratio if you need to, because it's set by default to 16:9. But then on the top layer, you have the VCAM itself, which looks like this. It's just this object that you just move around, and you notice I can resize, and I'll show you it working. So if I delete this and hit Control Enter to test the scene, you can see that this tested video, this frame here, uses the actual stage size that you can see behind here as the camera. So if I were to move things around, they would stay within this camera boundary. When I have the VCAM in play, however, I can zoom in by shrinking it. Now, when I shrink it, I hold Shift and then click and drag, because if I don't hold Shift, it can change like that, and you don't want that. You want to hold Shift so it sticks to a rigid lock, and I can zoom in like this. And now when I hit Control Enter, you'll see that it's zoomed in. I can also do things like rotate it slightly, then Control Enter, you can see that it's rotated as the camera has rotated. That's something that you can't do with the rigid main frame without rotating the entire scene's contents. So a VCAM, as you might imagine, especially when doing more complex things, is extremely useful. So make sure to go down into the link below and download the reference file, because you will get 2 VCAMs, ActionScript 3 and ActionScript 2. They're both rotatable, they both work with scale as well. And they're extremely useful because you tween them, you rotate them, and you can just control an entire scene much more easily than you would using the rigid background camera. So rather than going into too much detail into how to use one, I'm going to go into a previous scene I've prepared to show you how I have used it in a much more complex way. Now, that's the 3rd file that's going to be provided in the reference files, is the scene which is a fight scene from Larry episode 2. Which is an animation I've created several years ago. Now, it uses the VCAM in several different ways, so I'm going to go through this with you and explain some of the ways that I've used the VCAM so you can understand some of the ways it can be used. Now, I use a VCAM all the time without fail, every time, even if I don't use complex camera motions, just because it's so easy to manipulate one camera instead of everything in the scene. Because if I need to make changes, all I need to do is move in between the camera instead of reconfiguring all the work that I've done in animating and tweening the whole scene around a static camera. So just to go through this quickly, we have things like fades. Now, these fades are done by, I'll show you just by hiding the sound and action. You can see I've got my VCAM on top and then a layer underneath called fades, and this is where I just get a simple black color and I shape tween it to a fully transparent black color, and this plays out, as you would imagine, tweening black into nothingness. Now, I always make sure that that's larger than the VCAM, and then when they're placed together, it creates a fade effect. And so I do things like this fairly constantly. I'm sure there are different ways to do it, but this is the method I use. And you can tween on top of that. You'll notice that the black shape stays the same. It doesn't matter how much bigger than the camera it is. And you'll notice that the camera jumped here from a small size to a big size. That's because when I show the action and hide the fade, I've jumped from a scene of this view, where this is the shot down here in the corner, to a different shot of this one. So VCAMs are very, very easy to kind of use in that way. So I'm going to go through here bit by bit and show you the way it plays out. So this is the first opening shot. The camera is pretty static. Then we have this shot where the camera moves and the background moves, and it's in a way that it makes it look like the camera's going into the room. All the camera work in the beginning scenes are pretty straightforward. There's nothing too complex. They're just slow movements, and then we're getting a little more complex here. So if you want to look in the reference files, there's the action folder. You can open here and look at all the animations themselves. They're often animated entire scenes in 1 or 2 movie clips. It does get complicated at times, so there's a lot to kind of look at. This is provided as a reference for VCAMs, but you will find a lot of things as reference to animation or special effects in here if you're a beginner. So they might confuse you, but they also might teach you a lot of things too. So that's why I'm providing the file. There's a lot to look at, and I hope you can learn something from it. Anyways, so playing through here, you can see that with rapid movements of the camera, we can kind of help emphasize movement, help emphasize tension. You'll notice here I did this quick sort of pan across where Larry looks over in this direction, and I'll just have the camera move across with him. And that has the whole camera shift. And that's so much easier than tweening the whole scene on a static stage camera. So playing along. So this is where things get interesting. So the firebolt is being thrown at Larry, and you can see that the camera moves with the firebolt at first and then bounces back. So I use a camera for emphasis. So when something hits, bam, when a character lands or when a fireball hits a wall, like in this case, you move the camera in a direction, but then oppose it instantly on the strike, and it adds emphasis to that movement. So I use this quite a bit. Here's an example when he jumps up, the camera kind of jumps up with him. A very fast zoom in, and then we have another example of the strike. So we're zooming in, and as soon as there is impact, bam, the camera zoomed out. Okay, so there are other tricks you can use, like rather than panning a whole background across, you just pan the camera with the character, add the rotation, and then instant cut to the impact. And notice that the impact is done mainly by the camera. So the character is barely animated there. There's just a very slight tween in his motion as he hits the wall. I'll zoom in a bit here so you can see a bit clearer. So there's very kind of minimal sort of animation, but the camera itself adds the impact. You'll notice how the camera has a very sharp jolt back. So it's like it's just hit, and then it's got the result of that contact. Kind of like how it's impossible to hit a drumstick to a drum without it bouncing back immediately. It's that sort of effect. And so next we have here the zoom in. We've got the camera rotating, and it's on this angle as Larry's running across. And the background is a movie clip, so you can't see it play out in real time, but it's a repeated scroll. So there's a lot to look at here. Then we have this camera pan around here, and there's so much that you can kind of do to make your job easier and add a lot of interest to an animation. So for example, this is what I wanted to do here was a Matrix style turnaround, and I didn't want to have to render the room in 3D and have it actually turn around or anything like that. And so what I've done is there are 3 parts to this. The first part is the character Larry. So if I go inside here, you'll see that I've animated him and his turnaround. So that's the first part, is animating him turning on an angle like that, and made it as smooth and slow as possible. The next thing I did was render the background in a really wide image form so that it looked like if I panned the camera across that on its own while zoomed in with the blur, it would look like looking around a room. And so in conjunction with that and the camera, moving Larry across the room and the camera with Larry, it gives the effect of the camera zooming around Larry while the room passing around in a 3D form behind him. So you can use things like that to create illusions of movement. So these are just kind of some ideas of how you can use a VCAM to create much more complex things than you could with a static camera, or much easier than you could with a static camera. And it's also, like, I use it most to create impact. So you'll notice here, without the VCAM, it's pretty flat. Not much happens. But with a VCAM, as you can imagine, seeing it from the perspective of this camera, having the zoom in and the impact and the pans across, there's so much interest and impact added. So that is the final look at the example here. Make sure to click in the link below, and there should be a lot there for you to look at, but most importantly of all, hold on to those VCAM files because you will use them a lot, I promise you. Anyways, thank you for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and until next time, I'll see you later.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoy my videos. You can download the reference files from this tutorial by clicking the link in the description. And remember to share any art, animation or game you make on Newgrounds.com. Until next time, see you later.